Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back again, this time around for something I said I was going to do a little bit earlier. I finally gotten around to putting a few on paper, which lets me do it. It is Crossroads fights, my favorite of all time. Now, what is a Crossroads fight? A Crossroads fight is a fight that you look at retroactively, right? When it's gone by for a little bit, and you go, that fighter was never the same after that fight. Now, there are a lot of reasons for a Crossroads fight, a lot of them. It can be someone gets beaten so badly they're physically never the same. That fighter can figure out a tactic that nobody else had figured out, and then everybody else after that uses that tactic, right? There are a lot of reasons. Sometimes a fighter just is too old, and in this fight, we realize it, or we realize some weakness they have. But I call them Crossroads fights. I'm going to do a couple of them today. This is just part one. There's going to be more of them. If you have any suggestions you want to see broken down, put it in the comments section. I'll see if I can get to them, or if I agree that they're a Crossroads fight. But Crossroads fights, Jimmy Smith edition. Now, some of these are going to be old school. Some of them are going to be fighters who are still active and could maybe turn it around with the time they have left in their career. So maybe, maybe not. But right now, I'm calling these Crossroads fights. So my first one, let's go a little bit old school with this one. For people who remember the Pride days, I got to go with Wanderlei Silva versus Kazushi Sakuraba. This was a big one at the time. Kazushi Sakuraba was destroying everybody. He was the Gracie hunter, all this stuff. And when he fought Wanderlei for the first time in 2001, he was destroying everybody in Japan. And Wanderlei Silva, while a destroyer, an absolute wrecking machine, biggest win of his career up to that point. He had just beaten Dan Henderson, really beat the crap out of him in Pride. Check out that fight if you get a chance. But Sakuraba was a submission machine, great takedown, real technical. The thing about Wanderlei Silva is Wanderlei had no interest in trying to submit Kazushi Sakuraba. Everybody else, the Gracies mostly, made it a point of pride. I'm going to take this guy down and submit him and show him that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is the best submission style in the world. Wanderlei just went, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. Don't care. Not trying to take you down, not trying to out-technique you. I'm going to beat the crap out of you. And that's exactly what he did. He went right at Kazushi Sakuraba, who was, the Pride Golden Boy. And this fight, of course, took place in Pride 13 collision course. Destroyed him in 1 minute and 38 seconds. Blasted him. They rematched 2 more times. Wanderlei beat the crap out of him both times. Broke his collarbone in the second one. Knocked him out in the third one. And that was it. Sakuraba, after that, was an up-and-down fighter from that point on. The magic of Kazushi Sakuraba that had been on display up to that point was gone. Fighters knew if you go at him and don't worry about trying to, get in a technique battle with the guy, you can beat him. And fighters after that did it with more and more success. The Kazushi Sakuraba before the Wanderlei Silva fight is a different guy than the one after the Wanderlei Silva fight. So, let's be fair, stick with Wanderlei Silva himself. This is one that, once again, a lot of you may or may not remember. This was against Mirko Cro Cop, Pride Final Conflict, September 2006. What had happened was Wanderlei had been on a tear in Pride. He had established himself as a #1 light heavyweight. He had avenged his loss to Ricardo Arona, where he had lost to him at the Pride Final Conflict light heavyweight tournament. Avenged that, then entered a heavyweight Grand Prix, which is the worst thing on earth he could have done. First, he beats Kazuyuki Fujita, a serviceable, big, strong Japanese heavyweight, and beats him by knockout. Then he faces a prime Mirko Cro Cop. If you have not seen this fight and you have a strong stomach, check it out. Why do I ask about your stomach? It's one of the most vicious beatdowns I've ever seen at the elite level between 2 elite level guys. Yes, Wanderlei's going up in weight class. I get that. But the idea that Wanderlei was such a monster at 205 pounds and had done well at heavyweight previously, okay, we know this. Cro Cop beat him from pillar to post the entire time. It's one of those where you're worried about his health halfway through a 5-minute fight. Beating the crap out of him, bloodied him, vicious ground and pound, was destroying him, picking him apart on the feet. Wanderlei's kind of wild, brawling style that works great until you go up against somebody who's a precision world-class striker. And against a precision world-class striker, Wanderlei was pretty helpless. And so got the crap beat out of him then, 5 minutes, 30 seconds in, head kick knockout, the patented Cro Cop head kick knockout, bounces off his head, knocks him out, he's done, he falls like a sack of potatoes. After that, Wanderlei, not the same guy. The Wanderlei Silva that some of you saw in the UFC was not really Wanderlei Silva. Vanderlei Silva, a big part of him stayed on the canvas. Against Mirko Cro Cop. Big, huge Crossroads fight. Vanderlei went through too many wars, picked the wrong guy, got the career beaten out of him. So it was one of those things where all the years caught up with him, and an incredible opponent right in his prime at the wrong weight class. Everything came together to make Vanderlei Silva a shadow of his former self after that. So I know a lot of people are going to say, well, he wasn't doing PEDs in the UFC. Sure, those are all factors. This beating was severe, and he was never the same guy. So moving on. Let's go to someone that Vanderlei Silva fought in the UFC, Chuck Liddell, who one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time. Can't argue with that one. But the run he went on at the end of his career was sad. Only way to say it. Now, where did it start? It started with the Quentin Jackson knockout. That's right, Rampage Jackson, UFC 71. This is May 2007. Chuck had just beaten, let's list them off, right? Since losing to Rampage and Pride, which he did, fighters could go back and forth back then. Weird. But he lost to Rampage and Pride. After that, he beats Tito Ortiz, Vernon Tiger White, tough guy most of you don't remember, Randy Couture, Jeremy Horn, Randy Couture again, Renato Sobral, Tito Ortiz, when he got the rematch, because Rampage went from Pride to the UFC. They rematched for the light heavyweight title at UFC 71. And here's the deal. When I say some Crossroads fights are about technique, right? Somebody figures out something that they hadn't really figured out before, or they take on a new kind of opposition. In this instance, Chuck Liddell had beaten wrestlers who were pretty good strikers, like Randy Couture. Like, he knew what he was doing. I mean, Renato Sobral, decent kickboxer, but more of a jiu-jitsu guy. Randy Couture, decent boxer, more of a wrestler. Tito Ortiz, more of a wrestler. He had beaten Jeremy Horn. So what he had done is, whenever he had taken on a real technical striker, he had trouble. Like Guy Metzger. Beat Guy Metzger in Pride. Before Guy Metzger got knocked out, he was taking Chuck apart. Chuck was able to get back in with his power, but he was losing. When he fought Overeem, he was hurt by Alistair Overeem. Alistair Overeem used to be light heavyweight. So Alistair Overeem in Pride was beating him, and then Chuck came back and knocked him out. So you saw leading into this fight that Chuck had problems with certain guys who had tight boxing, who didn't make big mistakes, who didn't try to out-grapple him. And that was Rampage. Rampage at the time, a pretty slick boxer, big for the weight class, didn't make a ton of mistakes. And Chuck, doing the Chuck Liddell thing, loose, hands low, threw a body shot, came back without bringing his hands to his chin. Rampage throws a shot over the top, knocks him out, and that is the end of the Chuck Liddell era, minute 53 seconds into round number one. At the time, and I watched this fight live, we didn't think Chuck would never be the same guy. We thought, okay, he lost, he's still a factor in the division, he'll be fine. He won one more fight, which was against Vanderlei Silva, and that was it for the rest of his career. Loses to Keith Jardine, Rashad Evans, Shogun Rua, Rich Franklin, Tito Ortiz, right? All by one-sided knockout. He was getting knocked out with increasing regularity. Just the guy couldn't take a shot anymore. What I think happened was he had an unorthodox style that required a certain level of timing. And once that timing was gone, he wasn't the same guy. Once you lose confidence and then, well, can I really drop my hands like I used to? And, do I have the speed to read punches? And he didn't really have that anymore. And so the power that had kept everyone at bay, that was partly gone too. He just couldn't keep up with this next generation of guys coming up. He was getting a bit older. And that's what happened. So that fight against Rampage Jackson was the beginning of the end for Chuck Liddell. So here's one of my favorite fights of all time that is unique in that it's a crossroads fight for both guys. Both fighters, I would argue, were never the same after this one. And it is, that's right, one of my favorites, UFC 189 Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald. Now, after Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway, a lot of people go, oh man, that was the greatest fight of all time. Rory McDonald, Robbie Lawler. What makes this one, to me, the greatest fight of all time is it was back and forth. Both guys had their moments. There were times when I thought both guys were going to win. It was bloody. It was difficult. It was a gut check fight. It had that epic stare down at the end. It was an incredible fight. Still number one all time for me. Still number one all time is Rory McDonald, Robbie Lawler. The difficulty is both fighters, I would argue, beat the career out of one another. Rory McDonald had his moments. He had some victories after the Robbie Lawler fight. You could see the difference. He did not want to engage. He did not want to go through a Robbie Lawler experience ever again. And you could see that in previous. When he beat Douglas Lima, he beat Paul Semtex Daly in Bellator, two very, very tough guys. But it was slick grappling, get on top, play it a bit safer, don't be stupid, don't get your nose broken. You could almost tell that his brain and his body was still thinking about the beating against Robbie Lawler, and I don't ever want to go through that again. And it affects your style. And so, as talented as he was against Stephen Thompson, which was his last fight in the UFC, he kept going for the stupid Imanari roll, all this stuff, rather than stand with another striker. I think he completely changed his style. He was mentally never the same, probably physically never the same after a beating like that. But Rory MacDonald had some wins, never won more than 2 fights back-to-back, and that was Paul Semtex Daly and Douglas Lima. After that, never wins back-to-back fights again. He's not the same guy. Well, same thing for Robbie Lawler, I would argue. He defeats Rory MacDonald, has a controversial win over Carlos Condit by split decision. A lot of people thought Carlos Condit won that fight. Loses his title to Tyron Woodley. After that is on the downside of his career. Loses to Tyron Woodley, beats Cowboy Cerrone, loses to Rafael Dos Anjos, loses to Ben Askren, loses to Colby Covington, loses to Neil Magny, gets the win over Nick Diaz, who should never have come back, knocked out by Brian Barberena, and went out on a high note against Nico Price. So you can see after the Rory MacDonald fight, there is a little bit of the Robbie Lawler of old left. It's not a whole lot. I really feel that the consequences of that fight on him physically took a lot out of him. Both Rory MacDonald and Robbie Lawler, never the same guys after that fight, after that showdown happened. So, when it comes to Crossroads fights, I really think mentally it stuck a little bit more with Rory MacDonald. Physically, it stuck a little bit more with Robbie Lawler. Remember, this is part 1. Going to list a bunch of other ones from various eras of the sport. If you have any you want me to go over in the comment section, please let me know. It's just part 1 of my favorite Crossroads fights. More to come.